He was late again. Not just late. Hours late. The kind of late where your phone dies while you're waiting, your coffee turns cold, and your hope starts peeling off like old wallpaper. Karen sat on the wooden bench across from the cafe where she and Stephen had agreed to meet. She hadn't planned to cry today. In fact, she'd promised herself she wouldn't. But there was a difference between promises you make to others and the ones you make to yourself. The second ones always break slower, like glass cracking down the middle. Her fingers tapped against her knee, her heart thudding louder with every passing car. She'd worn the navy blue dress he once said made her look like the woman he could never lose. Funny how that didn't seem to matter now. Stephen had changed in ways she could no longer ignore. Text replies that came hours later. Excuses layered over more excuses, and a silence that clung to their calls like fog. Karen stood up, pacing in small, anxious steps. A man nearby offered a sympathetic smile, probably assuming she'd been stood up. She returned a small nod, brushing away the emotion before it could gather weight. Then her phone buzzed. Finally, a message from Stephen. Sorry, caught up at work. Be there in 20. Of course. Work. Again. Karen could recite the script by now. Meetings that ran over. Urgent emails. A last-minute client crisis. She used to believe them. Now they just sounded like lies, told with a nice voice. And that's when she saw Gregory. Across the street. Tall. Casual. Leaning against the wall like he didn't have a care in the world. He wore his smile like it was meant for everyone. But when he saw her, it turned into something quieter, more personal. Karen hadn't seen Gregory in months. Not since the last time she and Stephen argued so badly. She'd left his apartment and wandered the city, half crying, half cursing herself. Gregory had found her that night too. Just like now, she walked toward him before she even decided to. Maybe it was instinct. Maybe it was muscle memory. Gregory never made her feel like she had to shrink. He never kept her waiting. Long time, he said, opening his arms. She stepped into them before thinking twice. He felt solid, warm, like something she hadn't had in a while. It's been messy, she said, her voice muffled against his chest. He didn't ask for details. He didn't need to. His hand rested gently on her back. No pressure, just presence. They walked together, slowly, the way people do when they don't want the moment to end too soon. She told him about her job, about the new project she hated, about her mother's annoying health advice. Gregory listened the way men like Stephen forgot how to, without interrupting, without checking. The time. You still with him? Gregory asked finally. Karen didn't answer right away. She just looked down, kicking a pebble with her toe. I don't know what we are anymore. That's not the same as yes. She looked up. His eyes were steady, not accusing, just knowing. I waited for him today, she admitted. Again, same cafe, same story. Gregory looked at her, and for a moment, Karen saw herself reflected in his expression, not as someone broken or pitied, but as someone who deserved better. Come on, he said, nodding toward a tiny bar around the corner. Let's waste someone else's time for once. Inside, it smelled like old vinyl records and wood polish. They ordered whiskey, neat. Karen didn't usually drink it that way. But something about the burn felt right tonight. They laughed, then fell quiet, then laughed again. She forgot how light she used to feel. Then came the kiss. It wasn't planned, not even hinted. It just happened. The kind of kiss that doesn't ask permission because it already knows the answer. It was soft at first, like a question, and then it deepened. Not out of passion, but release. When they pulled apart, Karen's breath caught, not in guilt, but in relief. That was when she saw him, Stephen. Across the street, he had just turned the corner, holding that tired look of a man used to being forgiven. He stopped. His eyes met hers. Then he saw Gregory. And what he saw was a kiss, a moment he could never take back. She didn't flinch, didn't rush to explain. Stephen expected her to wait, but she wasn't the woman he remembered anymore. She was the woman who'd kissed the man that never made her cry. Stephen didn't move right away. He just stood there on the sidewalk, stunned. Like someone who arrived at a fire after everything had already burned down. Karen felt her heart beating, but it wasn't panic. It wasn't shame either. She met his eyes, calm, unmoved, and she didn't look away. That seemed to bother him more than anything. Gregory noticed too. He turned slightly, glancing over his shoulder. "Let me guess," he said quietly. "That's him." Karen nodded. Gregory raised an eyebrow but said nothing. He just leaned back in his chair and sipped the last of his whiskey, letting the silence carry the rest. Stephen finally crossed the street. His steps were slow at first, then picked up speed, like his pride kicked in halfway. When he got to their table, he didn't look at Gregory. His eyes stayed locked on Karen, searching for guilt that wasn't there. "This what we're doing now?" Stephen asked. His voice was tight, low, trying to hold something in. Karen didn't rise. She didn't offer a fake excuse or scramble to fix his broken ego. "What do you mean now?" she asked. "You stopped showing up a long time ago." Stephen's jaw twitched. "I was late, Karen. I was coming." "No, you weren't," she interrupted, still calm. "You were always on your way, always 5 minutes out, always too tired, too busy, too distracted. And I kept waiting like it would change." He finally glanced at Gregory, then back. "So, what? You just moved on, just like that." "I moved forward," she said. "Big difference." Gregory stayed quiet, but his presence was solid, like a wall Karen could lean against if she needed to. He wasn't trying to win anything. He was just there. Stephen took a sharp breath, like he wanted to say something cruel, but stopped. He looked at Karen again, but now the anger was thinning out, replaced by something worse. Confusion. Maybe even realization. "I messed up," he said, softer this time. "I know I did. But this is how you tell me it's over." Karen tilted her head slightly. "You think it's about today, about one kiss. Stephen, I've been telling you for months. Every time I sat alone, every time I begged you to be present, and you said I was overreacting. That was me telling you. You just didn't listen." He looked like he wanted to deny it. Then he didn't. A silence hung between them, thicker than anything they'd said. Finally, Stephen stepped back. "I don't know who you are anymore." Karen gave him the smallest smile. "That's the point." He left. No big scene, no yelling, just a quiet exit, which somehow hurt more. Gregory exhaled, low and slow. "You okay?" Karen nodded, but it wasn't automatic. She really meant it. "Yeah, I am." They sat there for a while, the kind of stillness that lets you breathe again. She didn't know what this thing with Gregory was, or where it was going, but for once, it wasn't about labels, or guilt, or promises someone wouldn't keep. It was about peace, the kind that didn't need to be earned. Later, when they stepped outside, the night air felt different, sharper, cleaner. Gregory glanced. "Over. You hungry?" Karen smiled. "Starving." They walked toward a late-night diner a few blocks away. No expectations. No lies to cover. Just two people with no need to rush. And behind them, on that street where Stephen had stood like a ghost of all the things he never did, Karen didn't leave a single piece of herself behind. The diner was half empty, lit in that hazy yellow glow that made everything look a little softer than real life. Karen slid into a booth by the window, tucking her legs beneath her, like she always did when she was comfortable. Gregory sat across, from her, arms resting on the table, fingers drumming slowly like a rhythm he wasn't aware of. A waitress came by, older, chewing gum with a look that said she'd seen every type of heartbreak walk through that door. "Coffee?" she asked. "Please," Karen said, then looked at Gregory. "You?" "Double," he said, "and a plate of something greasy enough to kill me slowly." The waitress cracked a smile and walked off. Karen leaned back, staring out the window. "It should hurt more," she said softly. Gregory didn't pretend not to understand. "You were done hurting. That's different." She watched the cars pass, some fast, some slow, all of them going somewhere else. "There's this part of me that wants to rewind. To the first time Stephen disappointed me. The first red flag. The first lie. I think about who I was then, and wish I had the guts to walk away." "You don't need to apologize to yourself," Gregory said. "You loved him. Even the wrong people deserve a chance." Karen turned back to him. "And how many chances before it's self-sabotage?" He shrugged. "Probably around the time they expect you to stay broken for their comfort." The coffee came, hot and bitter, the kind that didn't care about flavor so much as getting the job done. Karen wrapped her hands around the mug, grounding herself in the heat. "I used to defend him to my friends," she admitted. "Even when they saw what I wouldn't, especially Conception. She warned me 100 times. But I kept thinking he'd change, that it was just a phase, or stress, or whatever excuse he gave that day." Gregory raised his eyebrows. "What happened to her?" "She got tired of watching me tear myself up over someone who didn't care enough to fight for me. We stopped talking a few months ago. My fault. I kept choosing him over everyone else." "Sounds familiar," he muttered. Karen blinked. "What do you mean?" He hesitated, then looked straight at her. "I was in something like that once. Before you and I met. Her name was Lila. Beautiful, charming, good at making me feel like I was always one step from being enough." Karen stayed quiet. Gregory rarely talked about his past. She leaned in a little. She'd break me down with one sentence, then patch me up with a kiss. Kept me in that cycle for 2 years. Told myself I was strong for staying. Turns out I was just scared to be alone. Karen looked at him differently now. Not as some safe harbor, but as someone who knew the storms just as well. Maybe that was why she never had to explain herself with him. "Do you still talk to her?" she asked. "Last I heard she got married. To someone richer. Probably duller. Hope he figures her out faster than I did." Karen smiled, then took another sip of coffee. "It's weird, right? How we carry the people who broke us, long after we've stopped loving them. They leave fingerprints," Gregory said. "But that doesn't mean we're still theirs." Karen looked at him then. Not just in the moment, but really looked at him. There was no mask, no performance, no trying to impress. Just a man who knew the value of peace because he'd once lived in chaos. Outside, the city was quieting down. The rush had faded into a slow hum. Inside, she felt a strange stillness in her chest. Not numbness, something better, relief. She reached across the table, her fingers brushing his. Not out of romance, not yet. Just gratitude. For showing up, for staying, for being real. Gregory met her hand with his own. "I think," Karen said, slowly, "this is the first time in months I feel like myself." "Then let's not mess it up," he replied, grinning. They stayed there long after the plates were cleared, and the coffee went cold, because time finally felt like something they had. By the time they left the diner, the streets had emptied out, and the city felt like it had exhaled. A few cabs passed by, headlights washing everything in momentary light before slipping back into quiet. Karen walked beside Gregory, her hands tucked into the sleeves of her coat, not because it was cold, but because she needed to hold something, and herself would do for now. They didn't say much on the walk back, and it wasn't awkward. It was peaceful, a kind of silence that didn't demand to be filled. Karen couldn't remember the last time she'd felt so unhurried, so unwatched. With Stephen, she always felt like she was waiting to be judged. One wrong word, one bad mood, and the whole night could tilt. With Gregory, it felt like she could say nothing for miles and still be heard. When they reached her building, she stopped at the bottom of the stairs. The light above the entrance flickered, casting her in and out of shadow. "This is me," she said, though it was obvious. Gregory nodded. "You want company?" She hesitated, not because she didn't want him there, but because for once, she didn't want this to be another mistake she'd have to explain to herself in the morning. "I do," she said, "but not tonight. I need to sleep without anyone else's energy wrapped around me, just once." He smiled, not hurt, just understanding. "That's probably the best thing I've heard in a while." Karen laughed, a short, surprised sound. "Why?" "Because it means you're choosing yourself. Not a man, not a moment, just you." She nodded slowly, letting his words land. "I spent so long being someone's girlfriend, someone's fallback, someone's reason to try harder next time. I don't even know what I sound like when I'm not explaining myself." "You're starting to remember," Gregory said. He stepped forward and hugged her. Not tight, just long enough to say what didn't need saying. She closed her eyes and breathed him in. Clean soap, worn leather, faint cologne. It felt nothing like Stephen. That too was a relief. When they pulled apart, he looked at her with something softer than affection. Something steadier. "I'll call tomorrow," he said. "You better." He smirked, turned, and walked back into the quiet cities. Karen climbed the stairs slowly, not in a daze, but something more grounded. Her apartment smelled like lavender and old wood. She left the lights off. The dark wasn't heavy anymore. She peeled off the dress Stephen used to love, dropped it on the floor like it meant nothing, and pulled on an old sweatshirt that still smelled like laundry detergent. She wiped off her makeup, washed her face, and looked in the mirror. Really looked. She wasn't glowing, and she didn't look like some radiant new woman on the edge of a transformation. She looked tired, but clean. Honest. She lay on the bed, arms behind her head, staring at the ceiling. Stephen had texted once more. A single message. "We should talk." She turned the phone face down on the nightstand and didn't reply. Not tonight, maybe not ever. The next day, she called Concepcion. It rang 4 times before her old friend answered. "Wow," Concepcion said. "You remember my number?" Karen winced, then chuckled. "I deserved that." "Damn right you did." "I'm sorry," Karen said quietly. "For all of it. For shutting you out. For choosing him over everyone." There was a pause on the line. Then Concepcion sighed. "I hated him, you know. Not even because he was trash, but because you kept making him your whole world when he barely made you his Tuesday." Karen smiled sadly. "I know. I was afraid to see it." "I know that too." Another pause. "You okay now?" Concepcion asked. Karen nodded, even though she couldn't be seen. "Getting there. I kissed someone last night. Anyone I know? No. Someone who didn't make me cry. That's the whole point. That's a damn good start." They talked for a while, laughed more than Karen thought she could. And when she hung up, she felt lighter, like she'd taken a piece of herself back. By afternoon, her phone buzzed. Again. "Gregory!" This time she smiled as she picked it up. "You free?" he asked. "I could be. Want to meet at that little bookstore near the river?" I saw you post about it once. Karen grinned. You stalk me now? I research. She laughed. Yeah, I'll meet you there. As she got ready, she didn't do it for him. She didn't dress to impress or style her hair the way Stephen liked. She wore jeans, pulled her curls into a messy bun, wore her oldest, sneakers, and for once, she felt more like herself than she ever did in all those expensive dinners and long apologies. Because peace doesn't require permission. The little bookstore sat tucked between a closed-down tailor shop and a flower stand that always smelled like wet roses. Even when it hadn't rained, Karen had walked by it dozens of times, but never gone in. Not with Stephen anyway. He never had the patience for places like that. Said bookstores were for people who had time to waste. Now, with Gregory waiting at the door, leaning casually against the frame with a dog-eared paperback in hand, Karen realized how strange it was that she'd stopped going to places she loved just to avoid his disapproval. That wouldn't be happening anymore. You're late, Gregory said, teasing. She checked her phone. I'm 3 minutes early. Yeah, but I've been here since forever, so technically, still late. She rolled her eyes and stepped past him, letting the smell of old paper and worn wood wash over her. It was warm inside, quiet, but not silent. Jazz hummed softly from some hidden speaker, and the shelves were tall, overstuffed, mismatched. It was perfect. Gregory followed her down one of the narrow aisles. You look different today. Karen turned to face him. Bad different. No, like, weight off your shoulders different. She gave a small smile. That's because I didn't wake up waiting on someone else's mood for once. They browsed in silence for a while. Karen ran her fingers along the spines, picking up random books, flipping through pages just to feel the texture. Gregory didn't hover or try to lead. He just existed next to her, fully present. It felt strange to feel so seen without being studied. Hey, he said at one point, holding up a copy of The Alchemist. You ever read this one? Karen laughed. Of course, in college, when I still believed everything had a divine reason. You don't believe that anymore? She thought for a second. No, not really. Some things are just people being selfish, or lazy, or cruel. Sometimes life isn't deep. It's just disappointing. Gregory nodded slowly. Yeah, that's true. But I still think you can find something good, even in the mess. She tilted her head. You always this optimistic. No, he said. But I fake it well. They kept walking, side by side, until she stopped at a shelf near the back. Romance, novels. The covers were all over the top. Shirtless men, glowing sunsets, dramatic fonts. Stephen used to scoff at them, call them desperate fiction. Karen picked one up and looked at Gregory. Be honest. If you saw this on my nightstand, would you judge me? He looked at the cover. Not unless you judged me for all the alien thriller trash I read. She smiled. Fair enough. Gregory took the book from her, flipped it over, then glanced at her. What if life was like one of these? Neat arcs, dramatic betrayals, a guaranteed happy ending. Karen shrugged. Then I'd have dumped Stephen in chapter 3. He grinned. That's one hell of a plot twist. They paid for their books. Karen picked 3. Gregory grabbed one with a cracked spine that looked like it'd been through war. As they stepped out, the air had cooled slightly, just enough to make her wrap her arms around herself. Gregory noticed. He took off his jacket without a word and draped it over her shoulders. Thank you, she said, pulling it tighter. It smelled like him. Mint gum and something faintly smoky. They walked down toward the river, neither of them saying much, but everything felt said already. As they reached the edge, where the stone path curved and overlooked the slow water, Gregory turned to her. I don't want to rush anything. he said. "But I want to be around, not as a distraction, not as a rebound, just around, whatever you need." Karen studied his face. No games, no pressure, just presence. "I think," she said, "what I need is to learn how to trust myself again. But I wouldn't mind having you nearby while I figure it out." He nodded once. That was enough for him. They sat on the bench overlooking the river, watching the reflection of city lights ripple on the surface. And for the first time in a very, very long time, Karen didn't feel like she was chasing anything. Not love, not validation, not someone's approval. She was just there. And she was enough. The next few days felt like a quiet reset, like someone had finally turned off the background noise in Karen's life. No more waiting for texts that didn't come. No more second-guessing herself before every phone call. Stephen was gone from her world, not with a bang, but with the kind of silence that felt earned. He tried once more, a longer message this time. Apologies, mixed with half reasons and subtle guilt. He said things like, "You know I never meant to hurt you," and "I just lost myself for a while." But she didn't reply. She didn't need to. That version of her, the one who would have analyzed his every word and blamed herself for not fixing him, didn't live here anymore. Instead, she started walking again, every morning, headphones in, city around her, mind somewhere soft. Sometimes she'd call Conception, sometimes she'd just wander, stopping for coffee or a muffin from that one vendor who always gave her the corner piece. Gregory didn't push himself into her day. He was just steady. A message here, a meme there, a shared song, enough to make her feel thought of, never smothered. They met twice more that week, once at a gallery, where Gregory laughed at all the art titles and dared her to make up stories for the abstract pieces. Another time, at her place, sitting on the couch eating Chinese takeout, straight from the containers. That night, he didn't try to kiss her. He didn't even sit too close. He let her have space, and in that space, Karen realized she wasn't afraid anymore, not of being alone, and not of being cared for, either. It was that Saturday night, though, when everything shifted. Conception invited her out, just drinks, nothing heavy. Karen almost said no. Part of her was still cautious, still healing. But then she remembered how she used to hide behind Stephen's preferences, how she turned down invitations because he might get moody or jealous. She wasn't doing that anymore. The bar was lively, but not packed. Low music, red lights, laughter curling through the air like smoke. Conception waved her over immediately. "Drink already waiting." "You look lighter," she said, hugging Karen tight. "You've been eating vegetables and cutting out trash, haven't you?" Karen laughed. Trying. They settled into a booth, catching up like no time had passed. Karen told her everything. About that night outside the cafe, about the kiss, about Gregory. Conception raised an eyebrow. "And how's the new guy?" Karen smiled into her glass. "He's kind, like the kind that doesn't need a reward for it." Concepcion nodded, serious now. "Okay, but don't romanticize the bare minimum. Kind is good, but make sure he's consistent." "He is," Karen said without hesitation. "And the weirdest part is, I don't feel like I'm performing for him. I'm not exhausted after hanging out. I'm just me." Conception tilted her glass toward her. Then here's to peace over passion, stability over chaos. They clinked glasses and drank. Karen went to the bathroom around 11. When she came back, Stephen was there, sitting in her booth, next to Concepcion. Concepcion had her arms folded. That told Karen everything. Stephen stood when he saw her, too quickly, like he'd rehearsed this entrance. "Karen," he said, his voice all soft urgency. "I just needed 5 minutes. Please." Karen didn't move closer. "How did you even know I was here?" "Mutual friend," he said quickly. "I ran into Julia. She mentioned it. Look, I didn't come to start anything. I just needed to say this face to face." Conception stood. "Then say it quick. Because she owes you nothing." Stephen looked at her, clearly surprised Conception hadn't softened after all this time. He turned back to Karen. "I know I was selfish," he said. "I know I made you feel small, like I was doing you a favor by staying. I've been thinking about it every day since." Karen watched him, her face unreadable. "I just want another chance," he added. "I want to show you I can be better." The bar noise faded behind the pounding in her ears. The old Karen, the one Stephen trained to forgive too easily, would have melted at this, would have latched onto the guilt in his voice, the weight of the years they'd spent. But this Karen had learned to live without begging. "No," she said calmly. Stephen blinked. "What? You don't get to show up when it's convenient and ask to rewrite the ending." "I'm not asking to rewrite it," he said, voice cracking just slightly. "I'm asking for a chance to start again." "And I'm telling you," she said, stepping closer, "I'm not starting over. I'm moving forward." Conception stood beside her, solid as ever. Stephen stood there for a second, frozen in the spotlight of his own regret. Then he stepped back, nodded once, tightly, and walked out. Karen exhaled, then sat down. Conception placed a hand on hers. "Proud of you." "I'm proud of me too." Her phone buzzed. A message from Gregory. "I'm at that late-night pizza place near your block. You want in?" She smiled. "Tell me he's the one who texts you just to say hi." Concepcion said, watching her face, "He is." Then she stood up. "Go." Conception said, "But don't let him be your whole world, okay? Just let him in." "I will," Karen said. And this time she meant it. Karen walked the few blocks to the pizza place, with a kind of calm she hadn't felt in years. Not the fragile peace she used to fake. This was something sturdier. Like all the noise had finally settled, and now she could hear her own heartbeat, without it sounding like a warning. The pizza shop was nearly empty. Just a couple of kids sharing a booth, and an old man at the counter reading yesterday's newspaper. Gregory was seated by the window, already halfway through a slice, a second one waiting on a paper plate across from him. He looked up and grinned as soon as he saw her, his eyes lighting up in that easy, unforced way that had nothing to do with performance and everything to do with presence. "You came," he said. "Of course I came. You have food." Gregory laughed and slid the extra plate toward her. "I'm learning your love language." She took a bite and closed her eyes. "Okay, this is objectively better than emotional closure." "I'm flattered," he said. Then added, "Even if I'm second to pizza." Karen didn't tell him about Stephen. Not yet. Not because she was hiding it, but because it no longer felt urgent. What happened at the bar didn't belong to her future. It was just a final ghost. One last test she'd passed by, not flinching. She didn't need Gregory to rescue her from it. She'd already rescued herself. Still, he noticed something. "You all right?" he asked. "You're different tonight." She nodded, wiping her hands with a napkin. "I ran into him." Gregory didn't ask who. He didn't have to. He just looked at her and waited. He tried, she said simply. Apologized. Said he wanted to start over. Gregory kept chewing, slowly, but his eyes never left hers. And I said no. His shoulders relaxed a little, like he hadn't even realized how tense they were. "You okay with that?" Karen leaned back. "I'm better than okay. I feel clean. You ever feel that? Like you finally got the last bit of someone else's mess off your skin? He nodded. Like a good shower after a bad storm. Exactly. They finished their food, sitting in that easy way that comes when nothing's being forced. No pressure. No expectation to fill the silence with empty words. Karen realized she hadn't once thought about what she should say to keep things interesting. She didn't need to perform with Gregory. Just exist. When they left the shop, the streets were even quieter than before. She didn't reach for his hand, and he didn't reach for hers. They just walked side by side, their shoulders almost touching. You know, Gregory said after a block or two, I wasn't sure what this was going to be. You and me. Karen glanced sideways. What do you think it is now? He looked up at the sky, as if searching for the right word between the stars. It feels like something worth being patient for. That hit her a little harder than expected, because patience wasn't something she was used to being given. With Stephen, it was all about urgency, fast forgiveness, quick adjustments, never enough time to process anything before she was guilted into moving on. Gregory didn't rush her. He didn't make her feel like she owed him anything for sticking around. I don't want to rush into anything either, she said carefully. I'm still learning how to be with myself again. He nodded. Then let's just keep walking. So they did. They passed a jazz musician playing for no one but himself. A stray cat darted across the sidewalk, vanishing under a car. Somewhere, in the distance, a siren wailed, but it didn't touch them. Karen felt the cool air on her skin and realized she wasn't bracing for anything. Not rejection, not disappointment, not another apology dressed up like a promise. At her front steps, she paused. Thanks for tonight, she said. For the pizza, and for not asking me to be anything other than where I am. Gregory smiled. It's kind of my thing. She leaned in, close enough to smell that faint scent of smoke and mint again. Don't let it become a gimmick. He laughed. Promise. Karen didn't kiss him. Not tonight, but her hand lingered on his as she said goodbye. It was quiet, solid, real. She went inside, not floating or giddy, but grounded, at peace. And this time, when she looked in the mirror, she didn't wonder what anyone else saw. She liked who was looking back. The weeks passed gently, like the soft unraveling of something tightly wound. Karen didn't rush toward anything. She let the days carry her instead of chasing them. The rhythm of her life began to sound like her own again. She read more, walked more, called her mom without being asked. Even her apartment felt warmer now. Less like a place she retreated to, and more like a place she belonged in. Gregory was there, steady as ever. Not every day, not with constant texts or grand gestures. Just there when she needed him, and sometimes even when she didn't realize she did. They went to flea markets, watched bad movies, sat on the floor of her living room with takeout, and talked about everything but the past. And slowly, without announcement or pressure, the space between them began to fill. One night Karen came, home late from work, hair a mess, shoes in her hand, shoulders slumped. She found Gregory already there, having let himself in with the key she'd given him 2 days earlier. He was in her kitchen, burning the edges of a grilled cheese, like it was the most complicated recipe in the world. She leaned against the doorframe, watching him with a small smile. That's a lot of smoke for 2 slices of bread. He turned, grinning sheepishly. I got distracted. Your cat hates me. She doesn't have the emotional range to hate. She tolerates you. Gregory shrugged. I'll take it. She stepped in, dropped her bag on the couch, and moved behind him. You don't have to keep doing all this, you know. What, ruin dinner? No, she said, resting her chin on his shoulder. Show up. Be gentle. Stay. He didn't. Turn. Just kept working on the sandwich. flipping it with a little too much flair. I know I don't have to. I want to. Karen closed her eyes, breathing him in. This wasn't the kind of love that slammed into you. It was the kind that grew in the quiet, in the spaces between one healed moment and the next. Later, after dinner and a proper sandwich, Gregory sat on the floor while Karen lay across the couch, her feet propped in his lap. "Do you think," she said, twirling a strand of hair, "we could have met earlier? Like if we'd crossed paths before all the mess?" Gregory looked up at her. "I don't think we'd have worked back then. You were still trying to save someone. I was still trying to prove I wasn't broken." Karen nodded slowly. "Yeah, I guess we needed to break first, to know how to hold someone without cutting them," he added. She reached down and touched his face lightly, the kind of touch that said more than any words could. A few days later, Karen saw Stephen one last time. It was purely accidental. She was walking through a grocery store when she turned a corner, and there he was. He froze, looked surprised, maybe even hopeful. She didn't stop, just gave him a polite nod and kept moving. He called her name, soft, unsure. She looked back briefly. "I'm good, Stephen. You can go." There wasn't anger in her voice, not even bitterness, just closure. Back at home, she found a note Gregory had left on her kitchen table. He'd been there earlier to drop off a book she wanted. "You're not hard to love. They just made you believe that." Gee, Karen sat with the note for a while, holding it like something sacred, because for the first time, someone wasn't asking her to change, or be smaller, or wait. They loved her exactly where she stood. Later that night, she curled into bed beside Gregory, who had fallen asleep reading. She didn't say anything, just watched the way his chest rose and fell, steady and slow. And in that quiet space, between his breathing and hers, Karen smiled. She didn't know what the future would bring, but she knew this. She would never again be the woman who waited in the cold for someone to remember her worth. She was the woman who walked away and kissed the man who never made her cry.